Let's begin. Welcome to Session 11 of the 20th Annual Northwest Interlibrary Loan and Resource Sharing Conference. NWILL wishes to acknowledge that the territory called North America, now primarily occupied by descendants of European colonizers and other immigrants, is the rightful land of Indigenous Native American and First Nations populations. We are all responsible for understanding the history of colonization and genocide of Indigenous people, and must commit to learning, building relationships, sharing stories, and taking action to support Indigenous sovereignty, priorities, and actions. We encourage you to learn about the Indigenous peoples to whom the land you occupy rightfully belongs. Please visit the Documents section of the conference platform to learn more. Today's date is September 3rd, 2021. This session is titled, "The Dilemma of Returnables During COVID Leads to Unorthodox Solution," a partnership between academic and public libraries in Connecticut, and it will be presented by Kellie O'Donnell-Bowilla. My name is Rebecca Mintz, and I am the convener for this session. This session is being recorded with permission from the presenter. She retains the copyright to the information she is presenting and may request its removal from public viewing in the future by written request to the NWILL committee chairperson. However, at this time, it is planned that recordings will be available once captions have been added. Attendees will be notified when recordings are available. To turn on live captioning during this session, click on the CC link at the bottom of the screen and select Show Subtitle. If you have a question during the session, please use the Q&A function in Zoom, and I will pose these to the presenter at the end of her presentation. The door prize keyword will be revealed between the presentation and before the Q&A. Please see the door prize link in the Event Mobi menu. When the Zoom webinar ends, please complete the post-session survey in Event Mobi at the bottom of the session page. On that note, I will turn this session over to our presenter, Kellie O'Donnell-Bowilla.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'll start with just a little bit about myself. I lead the Access Services Department at Eastern Connecticut State University in Willimantic, Connecticut, which is in the eastern part of the state, as it says in the name. The university is part of the state system of higher education, and our consortium is called the Connecticut State Colleges and Universities, CSCU for short. I've been here for 5 years. My expertise is in interlibrary loan, circulation, reference and instruction, and course reserves. I've worked in academic and special libraries, but most of my career has actually been at a public library for 22 years. I'm really happy to be here at the Northwest Interlibrary Loan and Resource Sharing Conference. My presentation is titled, "The Dilemma of Returnables During COVID Leads to Unorthodox Solution, a partnership between academic and public libraries in Connecticut." In other words, it's the story of how 89 libraries, some public and some academic, formed a partnership aimed at solving a problem caused by the COVID shutdown of our academic libraries in March of 2020. Before I get started, I would like to review the players that you will hear me mention throughout my presentation. You have already heard me mention CSCU, which stands for the Connecticut State Universities and Colleges. The CSCU Library Consortium is made up of 18 libraries located at these CSCU institutions. 4 universities, 12 community colleges, the Connecticut State Library, and an online college. The University of Connecticut, which is the state of Connecticut's premier state university, is not actually part of CSCU, but we work together with UConn quite a bit and communicate regularly. The Connecticut State Library's Division of Library Development and their Deliverate CT statewide book courier service, you will hear me speak about a lot. The Connecticut Library Consortium, or CLC, is a major nonprofit statewide membership collaborative. The Connecticut Academic Library Interlibrary Loan Returns Task Force, which is the ad hoc group that formed in response to the dilemma of returnables caused by the pandemic's lockdown. And last but not least, and actually most importantly, are the staff of the 89 libraries, the 15 academic and 74 public libraries, and the academic students, faculty, and staff who took advantage of this unorthodox opportunity. So these are the players. As we all know, the pandemic spread across the United States, and students, faculty, and staff were sent home by Connecticut academic institutions. Students went home with their books due to having no time to return them in the hectic time before leaving campus, and or because they still needed these materials to finish their coursework for the rest of the spring 2020 semester. As the books became overdue, many were in lockdown too far from their closed campus library. I realize that Connecticut is a small state compared to many of the other states around the United States, but bear with me. And even if they lived close to a library and were willing to make a long drive, either way, most of the library's book drops were closed, and even if they were open, there were no staff to process these returns. So our dilemma as academic interlibrary loan specialists became, how will we get outstanding interlibrary loan books returned by students, faculty, and staff in lockdown? An interlibrary loan specialist from the University of Connecticut realized that she had about 1,800 books that would soon need to be returned. She speculated that other academic libraries had many outstanding interlibrary loan books as well. Her hunch was correct. As we later found out through a survey, other academic libraries had many interlibrary loan books out. For example, Central Connecticut State University had about 100, Fairfield University had about 95. My library had about 65 outstanding interlibrary loan books, and Quinnipiac had about 35. And these are just a few examples. All total, there were about 2,000 books outstanding. The interlibrary loan specialist from the University of Connecticut reached out to other interlibrary loan specialists from other Connecticut academic libraries to talk about this dilemma. Out of these talks emerged a small group of interlibrary loan staff that wanted to tackle this problem. We officially formed in May 2020 and called ourselves the Connecticut Academic Library Interlibrary Loans Returns Task Force. The task force consisted of 6 libraries: the University of Connecticut, Eastern Connecticut State University, Central Connecticut State University, Fairfield University, Norwalk Community College, Housatonic Community College, the Connecticut State Library, and we were joined actually later by the Connecticut State Library and the Connecticut Library Consortium. The interlibrary loan specialist from UConn served as our chair. We met a lot during the pandemic, of course, through video conferencing. We used Microsoft Teams, and we kept our notes in a one notebook that we shared amongst ourselves. The task force members brainstormed ideas to solve the dilemma. Our initial thought was to send prepaid shipping labels to our patrons. As we grappled with the thought of how much the solution might cost, the interlibrary loan specialist from the University of Connecticut proposed a compelling yet very unorthodox idea. The idea was to allow our patrons to drop off their interlibrary loan returnables to a Connecticut library other than their own campus library. This idea, as you know, is almost unheard of or taboo in the interlibrary loan world. The long-standing practice, as we know, is that books are always returned to the library where the request was initiated. Before we could even begin to wrap our minds around, before we could even, so sorry, I'm advancing too quickly. Before we could even get our minds around this idea, we had to consider several external factors. The biggest factor that helped us dare to think that our solution could become a reality was that we already knew that the statewide courier service called Deliver It, paid for by the Connecticut State Library, made daily stops at public libraries and weekly stops at academic libraries. We knew they had a great and reliable track record. In 2019, for example, they transported about 1.5 million items between 215 libraries, and therefore was very likely to be able to handle the extra volume. They saved Connecticut libraries about $9 million in postage in 2019. So knowing that this infrastructure was already in place and would be a free solution made this idea very attractive. But would the staff of the Deliver It Courier Service be willing to help us? And if so, would the director of the Connecticut State Library Division of Library Development, who oversees the Deliver It service, authorize it? Before we asked the director of the Connecticut State Library Division of Library Development if she would authorize the courier service to help us, we considered what our ask would look like. If we asked the Connecticut State Library to help us transport returnables from academic library to academic library, this would give our patrons the choice of 36 libraries, 19 private and 17 state, around the state, where they would have the option to return their interlibrary loan books. As you will see in the next slide, academic libraries in Connecticut are geographically clustered in the middle and to the south of the state's borders. As you can see, there are not many academic libraries in the western, northwestern, northernmost, and easternmost parts of the state. We had to come to terms with the fact that this solution would be helpful, but not to our patrons in lockdown in these outer reaches of our state. We also considered asking whether they would extend their service for this purpose between academic and public libraries. There are 174 public libraries in Connecticut, and along with the 36 academic libraries, we were excited at the potential that our patrons would have 210 libraries to return their interlibrary loan books to. This would give our patrons in lockdown just about anywhere in the state a chance to find a nearby library to drop off their items. As you can see in the next slide, public libraries are spread far and wide geographically in the state of Connecticut. And I know it's small, but compared to some of the libraries out in the West. But so at a glance, you can see the reach is extensive. They're everywhere in our state. Also, before we asked the Connecticut State Library whether they would authorize the service to help us, there were key questions that would also need to be answered before moving forward. Even if the Connecticut State Library allowed the service to help us, without positive answers to the following key questions, the project might not be feasible. For example, when would they be resuming the service? How would they handle the greater volume? Would they allow public libraries to exceed their 3-bin limit? How would COVID protocols impact their operation? Would there be any costs? And finally, and most importantly, a question not for the Connecticut State Library, but for the staff at each Connecticut library. Would they be willing to receive and forward interlibrary loan books of patrons not affiliated with their institution? And would they even have the capacity to help us due to the fact that COVID was wreaking havoc on all their services and staffing levels, and considering all the added extra work of the many COVID mitigation protocols like book quarantining, etc. Thankfully, the Connecticut State Library agreed to allow its deliberate courier service to be utilized for this project. They would pick up and drop off at all libraries, including academic and public libraries. They would allow each library to use as many bins as they needed during this temporary need. There would be no charges or costs. Service would resume on June 10th, utilizing their newly implemented contactless system. This contactless system had already been in the works before COVID. Transit times between stops would serve in place of a separate quarantine period. And the Connecticut State Library, along with the Connecticut Library Consortium, very generously offered to handle the communications between libraries that were needed to survey, encourage, and inform libraries about the project. At this point, the fundamentally most important question of all had to be answered. Would the 210 Connecticut academic and public libraries be willing to help us? If we couldn't get buy-in, our unorthodox solution might not be viable. In order to find out, a survey was sent to over 500 staff members from 210 Connecticut academic and public libraries to assess interest in participating in such a partnership. The questions included, are you willing to participate in receiving and forwarding academic interlibrary loan books to the home campus, or that is, the requesting library of our academic patrons? And their choices were yes, maybe, or no. And another question was, if you are an academic library, what is your volume of outstanding interlibrary loan books? And we also asked if they had any other suggestions or comments for us regarding the retrieval of academic interlibrary loan materials. After 2 rounds of communications, the survey response rate was 45%. And 89 libraries responded positively. And I included maybes in that. Buy-in was enough to go forward. Now that we had our questions answered and we had buy-in, we got busy. We gathered information about each of the participating libraries, for example, their website addresses, so that patrons could look up their operating hours, the location of their return bins, street addresses, driving instructions, and any COVID-related protocol information. We created an email template for communicating this option to our academic interlibrary loan patrons. We included a list of the participating libraries and a tear-off slip for our patrons to place in their books before returning. The purpose of the slip was to help the forwarding library to get the book back to the correct library, which was the requesting library, not the owning library. An online share tracking form was created for library use. We asked that each library, before placing books in the delivered courier bins, fill out a quick online form documenting the book title so everyone could track which books were in transit and on their way back. We tracked changing COVID conditions and monitored the governor's guidance and libraries' responses. We originally wanted to start in June, but eventually proposed August 4th as the launch date. But again, due to changing conditions, we postponed. We finally kicked off the project on September 4th. The project was a success. Approximately 1,800 books, or 90% of our outstanding interlibrary loan books, were returned to the academic library where the request was initiated. The cost of this unorthodox solution was zero. The teamwork by the task force, the 89 participating libraries, the deliberate Courier staff, and the directors of the Connecticut State Library Division of Library Development and the Connecticut Library Consortium was outstanding. The goodwill generated was phenomenal and is ongoing. And the Creativity Award goes to the University of Connecticut Interlibrary Loan Specialist, whose bold, out-of-the-box thinking paved the way towards solving the dilemma of interlibrary loan returnables during the COVID lockdown. The successful outcome of the partnership was acknowledged by the director of the Connecticut State Library's Division of Library Development when she mentioned the partnership in her Director's Corner e-newsletter. She wrote, "Partnership and community are vital to sustainability and resiliency always, and it has continued to be a lifeline during the last 12 months. The Connecticut State Library Division of Library Development is pleased to have partnered with the Connecticut Academic Library Interlibrary Loan Returns Task Force by offering our deliberate service for academic library returns and ILLs without impacting existing service. We understood that being able to absorb this into our service at no cost during a time when all budgets are stretched was a way to collaborate and to keep us all going. Our libraries, our communities, and our students. We were touched and brightened by the kind letter of thanks the task force recently shared in a Connecticut Library Consortium email. Thank you. Hopefully, we'll never have to activate such a partnership in the future. Although the challenge of dealing with the changing conditions of the deadly virus were unavoidable, there are many things that we could iron out and improve on. For example, we would find a way to get more libraries to participate, cut duplication in our communication efforts. For example, we contacted over 500 staff, and so there was we contacted more than one staff from each library, and the survey responses were duplicated in many instances. We would devise an easier tracking mechanism that participating libraries could use. The tracking form was not used. Unfortunately. And we would find a way to reduce the confusion of which academic library to return the book to. Many of our patrons did not put the tear-off slip into the book. So the participating libraries, especially the public libraries, had to figure out, where does this book go to? It says it's owned by such and such a library, but that's not where we need to send it to. So that was a little confusing. We try to make it easier. Also, we realized that we did not have a handle on how many of our outstanding interlibrary loan books were actually held by people in lockdown in the state of Connecticut. Some of our patrons may have been in other states, so we didn't have we didn't know how many were in Connecticut. Although, because we were a lot of the participating academic libraries were state institutions, so we assumed that most of our patrons were in lockdown in the state. And although at the end of the project, we got back a lot of our interlibrary loan books, we actually don't have an accurate picture of how they were returned. It could have been through the partnership, or it could have been students, faculty, and staff who returned them when they came back to campus for on-ground or hybrid classes in the fall of 2021. The journey from March 2020 shutdown to the successful wrap-up of the partnership occurred over roughly 10 months. After reacting to the pandemic in March and April, the task force worked through May until early September to get the project off the ground. From September 2020 through January 2021, the partnership was in place and resulted in the return of most of our interlibrary loan books. Here are links to more information about the Deliver It Courier service, the Connecticut Governor's COVID information portal, the Connecticut State Library Division of Library Development, and the Connecticut Library Consortium. And I also included examples of some of the task force documents that were used and some of the survey answers to the suggestion and comments questions, a letter about the survey, the introduction to the survey, the kickoff letter, and the letter to our academic patrons, explaining this option to them and giving them the option to use the tear-off slip, and other documents. So you could explore these links if you like, and you could email me or call me. Here's my contact information. Feel free to contact me and I'll be happy to send any of the resources or any other information you would like. And if you have any comments or questions for me directly, I'll be happy to get back to you. And thank you so much for your interest. I appreciate it.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Before we move on to questions, I'm going to show the door prize slide. Just a moment. Nope. Okay. So this Canadian park has lakes that glow blue at times, and it is Banff National Park in Canada. And I will put that in the chat in just a moment. And I apologize, I do not know if you need the comma, space, and Canada in your answer, but submit that code and hopefully that will work. So Banff National Park, Canada, and let's do some questions. Okay, the first question was, to clarify, ILL items from public libraries could be returned to academics, and if not, why?
Would you repeat the question?
ILL items from public libraries, could they be returned to academic libraries in this system?
No, this partnership was strictly to help academic libraries to get our materials returned. So it was not an option for public libraries to be able to return their interlibrary loan books to academic libraries. It was a one-sided thing. In the future, I mean, we could definitely get it going both ways. But for this particular project, it was conceived of by the task force included only academic librarians. So, I hope I answered your question. Okay.
Were any items lost, claimed, returned by patron that didn't arrive back at the proper institution?
As far as we know, everything got back to us. We didn't have the tracking, so we don't know for sure if any books had to make a couple of trips. So we don't have that level of detail. Unfortunately, if we were ever to have to do this again, we would find a way to really have really have a handle on what was really going on. For example, I wanted to as part of this presentation, I wanted to have stories for you that from a patron standpoint and how they were would say that it was a great convenient option, and they did return it to public library so and so in the northwest part of the state, and it was a lifesaver. But the tracking forms weren't filled out, and then I didn't we didn't check with each other. All of the academic libraries that participated, we didn't check with each other to say, well, how many did like what did you hear any stories? Did anybody get a hold of you? So in other words, we don't have the detail like that. So we don't know exactly, patron A, B, or C, how they actually got their books back to us. All we know is we got the books back to us, but we don't know what their stories were, so did that answer your question?
Hopefully. Okay. Once the books were returned to the requesting library, how quickly did they get back to the owning library?
That was out of our control, of course, because many of the libraries around the United States were closed, as we were. So there was no staff there either to process. And some of the mail rooms were closed down. So we couldn't be sure. So Eastern was lucky. I can speak for my library. Our mailing services opened at the end of August. So we started mailing the returns back, but whether they sat around in the owning library's mailroom until staff came in, we don't know. I mean, yeah, it's always all different for each book.
As it so often is with ILL.
Yes.
Did you ever consider lending books out through this system that would allow patrons to continue researching classes in lockdown?
Researching classes?
Research and classes. So it was a one-way system. It could do returns. But did you guys
Yes.
consider loaning anything out using?
Oh, I think Fairfield did that. I don't think any of the libraries in the CSCU, so my library did not. And I don't think UConn did that, but I know Fairfield did. So we all did different things.
Okay. Patrons drop dumps at my library, other libraries' materials regularly. Why not make the statewide courier system permanent?
Well, it is permanent. It's part of the state of Connecticut, and it's a wonderful, wonderful service that's paid for by Connecticut taxpayers, and it's administered by the Connecticut State Library. So we are very lucky in our state, which is small, but we have this excellent infrastructure where we have vans going out every day, picking up, dropping off. So it continues, but it's mostly geared to serve the public libraries around the state. So that's why they're limited to 3 bins. They can fill up 3 bins of outgoing, and then they can see 3 bins incoming. But with adding these academic library interlibrary loan books, which is not a usual part of what they're dealing with, it was going to add volume. So they were allowed to use an extra bin or 2. So this is ongoing. This happens all the time. They go around to all the public libraries every day, daily, Monday through Friday. And the academic libraries, they pick up and drop off once a week. Sometimes the academic libraries get left out a little bit, and sometimes it's like every 10 days or every other week. So it's an ongoing system, but it's really based for the public libraries. It's really geared for public libraries, but the academic libraries do use it as well. But in a normal times, we mail, the academic libraries mail the interlibrary loan books, the returns back, and they get mailed to us. Although if we're getting an interlibrary loan from a Connecticut library and it's a public library, sometimes they'll put it, instead of mailing it, they'll put it in the courier service. But the courier service takes a little bit too long. So the academic libraries are hesitant to use it really regularly. We mostly mail when things are normal times.
Thank you. And last question that we currently have, was every library in this partnership applying their own quarantine policy on those return to ILL? And was there a quarantine?
Yes, every library had to follow their own library in towns, COVID quarantine protocols. Every library had their own. I mean, most of us were following what the governor suggested, but sometimes libraries are sort of forgotten about. The governor will talk about businesses and K-12 schools, and the public libraries and academic libraries are sometimes not on their radar, as we all know. So eventually a guidance came out that was specifically for libraries, and I think most libraries used a 3-day quarantine, but others, going by the Realm project test results, wanted to quarantine longer than that. So every library did their own thing as far as quarantine, but we did all quarantine.
Okay. And that was the last question. Looks like there is some interesting comments about Indiana State Library resource sharing, and now there's a return anywhere request. So some interesting stuff in chat. I think we are running a little early. We've got about 5 more minutes if anyone wants to add more questions. Okay, so we're also hearing, so it looks like maybe in the chat it's a little bit more about partnerships between public and academic libraries that are regularly allowing people to use their home library to access the other library's stuff. So like in a public library, you could request things from your academic library. I could do that in my public library. I could ask for it and it would get sent here, and then I could return it here. And it's not necessarily interlibrary loan, it's just interconnected systems at that point. Does Connecticut have anything like that that you know of?
Yes, the CSCU, or the Connecticut State Colleges and Universities System, we have our own courier service, actually. So when we borrow and loan from each other, we use this other state courier system between us. So it works out really great. So that's wonderful. And it's a daily thing. So but if we get a request from Fairfield or the University of Hartford or Yale, our courier service doesn't connect there, so we'll mail. We could use the deliver it courier system that I was talking about, but that the timing of it is not ideal because there are so many. I mean, I'm not sure what it is, but there are, you saw how many. I don't know if it's unusual to have so many public libraries in one little state, but we have a lot of public libraries, so the courier service is very busy. So the academic libraries only get service once a week, and so we mail, or if we're in the same consortium, which luckily the 18 institutions that are the state institutions can have our own courier service. So that really works well, and it's very quickly. UConn is not part of our consortium, which is very strange. So we mail, even though they're down the street from me. UConn and Eastern are in the eastern part of the state. So so right, and then the privates, we mail. Did that answer their question?
A little bit. I mean, it's always nice to hear how things are set up between different institutions for interlibrary loan. I think someone had referenced the MM Link in Minnesota, which isn't necessarily making an ILL request. It's you just have access to other libraries through, you can look up things on their catalog, have it sent to your institution, and you return it to the institution. I'm not quite sure how it looks because I've never experienced one of that, but I think it sounds amazing. So don't know if Connecticut will end up developing anything like that based out of this, but it's always fantastic to hear libraries collaborating.
Yes, it was fantastic. The goodwill was amazing.
We did get one more question of by mail. Do you mean U.S. Postal Service or do you mean
Yes,
FedEx?
U.S. Postal Service.
Okay. So, with no more questions, do you have any last comments or shall we wrap this up?
I just want to say thank you for having me. And again, if anybody thinks of any questions or comments, please contact me directly. It's
Okay,
been a
and your
pleasure.
lovely slideshow is attached to this in Mobi, so that's also a good way to get your contact information. Thank you so much for presenting this.
Thank you.
And I'm going to say goodbye. We'll end the webinar.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.